Hello and welcome everybody to Phoenix Cinema Podcast. This is a podcast where we discuss what's showing at the historic Phoenix Cinema. And this week we are discussing Monster, the new Japanese movie by the filmmaker. Forgive me if I butcher this.
I was like, you're going in with a lot of confidence here.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I heard you pronounce it this way. So I think it's Koreeda.
Sure, that's how I would
Koreeda?
pronounce it, but I don't know if that's correct. I definitely do not speak Japanese. Koreeda Hirokazu was how I was.
Koreeda Hirokazu. That sounds good enough. Yeah. What do you think, man?
Well, I had a lot of fun watching this movie because I kind of specifically didn't watch any trailers or promotional content about it, and I had not heard anything about the film.
Same.
Which I would recommend if you are going to see this movie to do it with that approach. Because
100%, yeah.
I was so surprised by so many turns of the film. And with a title like Monster, too, and with kind of like the font that it's like written in the promotional materials, I was like, I'm like 15 to 20 minutes in the movie, and I'm like, this could go like, if a CGI like monster suddenly like burst into the room and started killing people, like I would have been like, that's this movie. It's not out of hand. Yeah. And so it's like, it was so exciting to go into it knowing nothing, because the film really does take some big twists and turns and goes in unexpected directions, and to kind of organically get to have that experience of watching it unfold was really enjoyable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It really does. And as a matter of fact, it's actually going to be hard to discuss this movie because it's so worth going into this as cold as you can. Because totally. Likewise, I knew nothing outside of like a base one-line sentence, descriptor. So yeah, it really does take you through some twists and turns that are just, so revealing, but also speaks to how wonderfully constructed it is just on a script writing level as a story. It's so great. So great.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I saw, I'm actually happy that sometimes I don't know how I feel about films kind of like throwing their accolades before the film starts or something. But at least in the version that I watched on YouTube, it had a thing at the beginning that said that it had won the best screenplay at Cannes that year.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm happy that that's there, because it is just so well deserved. I think like the movie is really, really so well written, to the point where like as I was getting to the end of the movie, I was thinking about some of the stuff that I'm writing, and I was just like, man, like I need to like crank it up to the next level, because it's like this is so well constructed, like the way that it carries you, Like if someone, and I do agree with you. If you really want to watch this movie, I'm almost tempted to say like, you should probably stop listening to this and just go watch the movie, because we're going to inevitably have to kind of like reveal some things while we discuss it. But like,
for sure,
there's like, the way that I didn't, if someone had come to me and said, I want you to write a story about like two kids who fall in love, which is what this movie is about. That's, again, go watch the movie first before if you want to watch it, stop listening now. But if someone had given me that brief as a writer, you know what I mean, to make that movie, there are like so many, every other way you could write it would be more boring and less interesting than this. And this way was so interesting and so like captivating at every turn, without being like sensational, really. You know what I mean? Like without, like when you actually understand the story, there's actually nothing in it that's like completely sensationalized, but just the way that it's told makes it feel like the story is sensational, like from kind of the beginning to the end, which is like
100%. Yeah, 100%. And that's, you're so right to look at it as a writer. First of all, the fact that it makes you go, I need to step up my game here. is great. But you're right. How would you even think to start where this movie begins? And and this film is, so it's told from three different perspectives, right? Three different points of view. And then throughout the movie, we keep flashing back. So sometimes we see the same incidents, but from another character's perspective, and we see it play out in an entirely different way. But that opening What's the first perspective? About 20 minutes?
It's from the
half an hour?
mom. Yeah, 30 minutes
From the
I'd
mom.
say. Yeah.
Is probably my, I don't know, see probably my favorite, because you're so caught up in it. Does such a great job as just as a mystery. And I feel like even the tone of it almost feels like a different genre. It's like we're veering into horror, sci-fi.
Yeah, it is like a horror film. Yeah,
for real. And so it's to make it to sort of almost convince us that we're watching one sort of film, and then to be able to segue into something else entirely when we move to another perspective is so impressive. And yet it feels of a piece. It's not disjointed. It's not jarring. It feels cohesive.
Yeah, 100%. It was like, I was thinking about, now when I watch a movie, for the podcast, I'm thinking of, what would I pair this with? And it was very funny because like every 30 minutes it changed. Because for the first 30 minutes, the film that it reminded me of was The Exorcist.
Oh, wow.
Like not necessarily in its tone, but I had a professor who I said something about The Exorcist that I do think is true, especially now that I have kids. And he was like, I think the reason The Exorcist is maybe the scariest movie ever made is like because a parent's greatest fear is that something is wrong with your kid and you don't understand it. Like that's probably one of the worst things that could happen for a parent. It's almost in some ways worse than your child dying. I mean, of course, a child dying is horrific, but when your child suddenly doesn't feel like your kid anymore, there's something so haunting and terrible about that. And that's like what's happening in the first 30 minutes of this movie, and it's really spooky. And some of those little lines of dialogue that the kid says, where he's talking about rebirth and he's talking about like, is a human if they have a pig's brain and stuff, and you're like, what is going on? And she goes into the school, and the performance of all of those teachers and the principal and stuff. Yeah, there's some great acting moments, and the way that some of it's shot too, where like you're just seeing slivers of her face like in between the shoulders of these other characters and stuff. It's like, I agree with you. I think it's probably just my horror sensibilities, but I think like I was particularly impressed with the first kind of 30 to 40 minutes of the film. That is just so tense and so like restrained, and really makes you feel like especially with how quickly it was moving, and the editing style is quite kind of fast at the end of the day, and like it moves through scenes quite quickly. So I remember thinking like, if I'm feeling this like anxious at like minute 30, I'm like, we've still got an hour and a half left of this movie. I'm like, where can we possibly go? And so I was very surprised then when it did when it kind of like stopped and then like went back, and then that was a big like I really did not know the movie was going to do this at all. I had no idea that we were going to be kind of revisiting the same thing a second time.
Yeah, for sure. And I have to say that is, I mean, another part of the reason why I love that opening half an hour or so is because it's from the mother's perspective, and the mother's performance is just incredible. I think her name is Sakura Ando is the actress's name. And yeah, she gives a performance that is just so lovely. I mean, it's like you were saying, from the perspective of a parent, as someone who is just terrified, she doesn't really know what to do, what's happening. And you really feel that fear, that uncertainty, that not knowing, and the desperation. It's a wonderful performance. I was really struck by her.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of really nice acting moments throughout the whole piece, and the ways that like they I think the performances become, especially the performance of like the teacher, Mr. Hori, like it becomes his performance is great because you get him in these scenes and you're like, who is this guy, right? Like he feels so evil and like so out there, and then you get like that. One of my favorite scenes was like kind of the combination of the two scenes. Like they pull him into that like supply room in the school, and they're like, you can't admit like you did anything wrong. Like you got it like, and he's all like, shouldn't we just like say that we're sorry? And they're like, no, like you got to like put on a front for the school. And then they're like having him rehearse lines where they're like, yeah, no, don't say that, say this instead. And so you realize, like, it's this great moment where you realize, oh, every time we've seen him so far on screen, he's like been like rehearsing lines, right? Like he hasn't actually been like being himself or like expressing his own opinions, which is great. Yeah. So his performance, I think, I particularly enjoyed too, because it has this like these multi levels of you're like seeing these kind of like different moments for him and stuff like that, which was fun.
Yeah, and it's the every time we were in the head teacher's office and we just have this group of teachers all together, there was something almost. It was extremely frustrating, but it was also something really comedic about it too. There's this like bumbling energy amongst all of them, you know, the way they all shuffle in together, you know, there's the sort of culture and the custom of bowing, but then when they're alone, quite violent too. I mean, they shove him up against the wall in that like utility closet. It's like the dynamic between the teachers is like so weird and strange. I thought.
No, yeah, I 100% agree. It makes me realize, and I never want to make like generalizations, but like, you know, when we've been watching like Kurosawa stuff and Kurosawa's ability to like block and choreograph like groups of people and how they move together, and then that's something I've noticed too in watching like The Boy and the Heron with like the groups of the like the aunties and the way that their choreography goes together. I don't know. There's something about, I just feel like I've been watching a couple like Japanese films lately where I'm like, man, when you've got 5 or 6 people in a room, the ways that they can figure out how to like get that group choreography to work just like always really impresses me.
That's such a great point. You know, it's the way that they all move together in this movie does remind me of the aunties or, you know, the older women, the group from The Boy and the Heron. It's exactly the same kind of, moving as one almost.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
That's a great point. But yeah, to speak to where, again, and trying to stay as spoiler free as possible, but to speak to where the movie goes.
Yeah.
From there, and you touched on it in your opening, earlier as well, but it's just so, it's so remarkable because I just didn't expect it. And like you said, it's a love story, and it's a love story that, you know, I just wasn't expecting. And it just really, like you said, Ian, I think the writer of this movie, Yuji Sakamoto, how they approach telling this story, so unique, so unique, so wonderful, and so beautiful, so beautiful as a mystery, as a coming of age, and as a love story. It was so wonderfully surprising. Yeah,
I've seen stories before, you know, about kind of forbidden love where there are parent figures or other figures who are saying, you know, I don't want my kid to be this way, or I don't want you to do this, or kind of like actively stopping them. And there is kind of one character in this film that's that way. But for the most part, what you see here is like the kids are so afraid of what the adults will think, and so afraid of how the adults might judge them, that they end up, you know, kind of doing these white lies, right? These ways of, they don't want to be made fun of by their friends. They don't want to, and so they just end up not being genuine to themselves, you know, or to their, and because of that, the parents become so worried, you know, or the adults in the situation become so concerned, and they're trying their best to figure things out, and then they take a tiny thing that doesn't matter and they make it really big, and then they ignore another thing that should matter, and you end up, the way that, especially the way the story was told, I think did such a good job, you know, where it holds us out. We don't actually see the kid's perspective until the very end, which I think is often how these situations play out, right? As adults, we're so engrossed in the relationships with the adults, and then we don't actually figure out how the kid was feeling until maybe never, in some cases, but until much later. And so to kind of see that of like, oh yeah, sometimes these forms of kind of discrimination, you could say, comes less from a person maybe being, you know, actively discriminating, and more from a person just not taking the time to really like sit down and try to figure out what's going on, and instead just like making assumptions. This is a whole movie about kind of the evil of assumptions, basically, and not actually like listening and figuring out like what the core problem is.
Yeah, absolutely. And the movie does such a great job of putting us into the confusion and the fear that you must feel um, when you do feel as if you're different, to everybody else. You know what I mean? I think it's so interesting also in this movie, the relationships that these two boys have with their fathers, or or not,
Right.
and that is also such an interesting thing to compare, because there's a lot of themes that run throughout this movie where these men are talking about what it takes to be a man, right? Be a
Yeah.
man, be tough. And one of these boys has lost their father,
Yeah.
and the other one still has one and seems to be fairly, abusive, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not great. But to push to sort of come to terms with, what do my parents want of me? What does my father want of me? Following in your parents' footsteps, and sort of
Yeah.
looking to them as your idol, and your sort of your, you take your cues off of them, really, as to
Yeah.
what kind of person you're going to be in life. And that I found so fascinating, because I can only imagine that when you're not feeling in any way that you are the person that your father is or your mother is, and that how that must just roil within you, and how do you push back against that, or how do you make that work? It's so fascinating.
This film it reminded me a little bit of Bong Joon-ho's work in that, like, I think Bong Joon-ho is also very smart at, I think he and also this writer and director combo, like they're using dialogue in such a smart way, where there are these dialogue moments that feel maybe unimportant or insignificant, and then they find a way to loop back to them, where suddenly that dialogue moment is like,
yes.
boom, like huge. Like again, speaking to the power of the writing, like when she's in the car with him and she's like, the deal I made with your dad is that, like, I'd parent you until, like, you got married and had kids and, like, had your own life figured out, right? Which is just a 100% normal thing for a parent to say, more or less. And then you revisit that scene in a different context, and suddenly you're like, oh, like, that's the worst thing that she could have said,
Yeah.
or like that line for, like, Mr. Hori's, like, girlfriend, where they're kind of joking around in that one apartment scene, and she says, like, shouldn't you know to never trust a man when he says, like, it'll be fine, and a woman when she says next time, right? And that's just like a nice little line, right? It's like a nice little joke. And then the last scene you see her in, when she's, like, leaving the apartment, she says, "I'll see you next time." And she, like, kisses him on the cheek. And it's just
He's
like
oh
such a
shit.
yes,
Yeah.
it's just such a smart way to use dialogue, where it's like you seed these ideas into these scenes that are just nice character building scenes. They're just like, they feel very organic. They don't feel forced at all. And then you find kind of like just the right way. It's like in Parasite, when they have that whole thing on, "This is my plan," and then the film ends with him saying, like, "That's my plan. I'm gonna go save my dad." And you, it's just, as soon as he says that word, you're like, no, like, it's like suddenly it all, like, clicks together.
Right.
Yeah, I really admire that writing so much. It's something I'd love to see more in my work, is like, how do you take a dialogue scene and have an audience remember it enough that you can pay it off later, but don't remember it so much. Don't be so obvious with it that they're like, ooh,
That it's
something
so
was clearly happening there.
sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's just the right combination of it in this film.
Absolutely. Yeah. Did you have any particular scenes that stood out to you? I mean, one scene that I really haven't been able to really stop thinking about since I saw the movie was when the main kid, he has this moment with the head teacher. They share a scene together that is so wonderful, and it's a way of illuminating. I mean, the head teacher is a really enigmatic, mysterious,
She's great.
figure throughout the entire movie, to the point where she's almost, portrayed as, like, evil, And
I thought for a minute she would be, like, the last flashback. Like, about halfway through the film, I'm like, the headmaster's going to be the last flashback, and we're going to find out that she's, like, a terrible person or something.
Right. She's the man behind the curtain. Yeah.
Right.
And this one scene between the two of them just does so much to illuminate and sort of strip away any preconceived notions we ever had. and what she tells him to do using these musical instruments is, I mean, it's probably my favorite moment in the movie. And talk about a way to just use artistic expression to relieve yourself, to, you know, to express yourself, to, you know, and it speaks to, it doesn't matter. It could be an instrument. It could be a laptop. It could be a writer. It could be a camera, a paintbrush, whatever that is, whatever you're going through, use it and blow as hard as you can. Beautiful.
Yeah, it was gorgeous. No, that was probably my favorite scene as well. It was really unexpected. I didn't think that we were going to get that, you know, and I think it's especially cool because, again, just speaking to the cleverness of the writing and directing, it's like that has always been a climactic moment in everyone else's story. And then you hear these like brass instruments playing. And the first time I heard it, I was just like, oh, interesting. That's just like a strange choice. And then the second time I heard it, I was like, maybe this is just like part of the soundtrack. Like maybe it's just like a Lynchian thing that's just like all these.
That's what I thought. Yeah,
characters are like hearing it in their minds.
To it. Yeah,
right. And then you like actually see like what it is in reality, and it's so beautiful and kind of pivotal for this other character who you didn't even know was present in those other scenes. You know, it's like it's really moving. Yeah, I love that scene, and then. Yeah, I don't know. I think, again, it probably is just like the thriller, like horror writer in me, but I just think a lot of the mom scenes, I think I just really loved when she goes, every time she went to visit the school, and it's just like, so, you know, that scene where she's asking him when she's like, speak to me like I'm a human, and then, or she's like, are you a human being? And then the woman looks at her notes.
Yes.
I'm like, oh, it's so good.
Brilliant.
And she throws she's like throwing stuff, and she's just like trying to get people to engage with her. I think is really, really, those scenes just like really, really struck me, you know, very hard. And
I love it too because the reaction of the mother in those moments they seem so natural. They are what the audience is almost begging her to say next. You know, when she is asking them, what's going on with my son? You know, what have you been doing to my son? And what's his name? Hiro, the teacher he just pops a candy in his mouth, and she just sort of takes a moment where she just kind of looks at everybody and looks at the head teacher and looks back at him and is like, did he just put candy in his mouth? And it's so, your jaw just drops because you're like, what is this behavior?
Yeah. No, it's really excellent.
Yeah, it is excellent.
I would, you know, I think like it's hard to have it's hard to know if I have any critiques of the film, but I will say that like every single story made me realize that the film was something different. And I think by the time I got to the last story and started to realize what I think the filmmaker like really almost kind of like wanted to talk about, I did almost feel, I will say, I did almost feel maybe a small sense of, and this is probably intentional, and maybe there's just a beautiful lesson here that I need to kind of just ponder over more, but it did almost feel like by the time I got to the end of the film, I almost felt like, oh, I had maybe assumed that you as a director were most interested in talking about what it feels like to be a single parent, or how it feels like to be a misunderstood teacher. But then by the end, I realized like, oh, I think you wanted to talk about what it feels like to be a kid who's you know in love and can't trust any adults around them, and when I kind of like realized that, I almost wanted, like, I wish that could almost have been talked about more or something. I don't know. I felt like by the time I got to that moment at the end, I was like, oh, I see this movie for what it is. But I did almost feel a little bit of like, oh, like, and we're not gonna spend maybe enough time with these kids to maybe fully experience that, and that maybe is exactly the point of the film, is to kind of say like the reality is this type of relationship can be so fleeting and can be so understood that it's almost like we don't really quite get full access to it or see where it goes or see how it develops. I don't know, but I felt simultaneously a sense of kind of loss that I didn't see more of the kid's story. And then I'll be honest, I think I just was so drawn in by the performance of the mother.
Totally,
that I did almost feel like I was like, oh, I wish that by the end of the film I somehow got something more with her a little bit, because I was like, She just blew me away as a performer and as a character and stuff. And I mean, I would love to go see like more of her work, because I really was like, that was the only bittersweet thing for me at the end is, you know, when I discovered what the movie was about, I was like, oh, this is beautiful and important and lovely. But then I was like, oh, I don't think I'm going to see any more scenes with her anymore.
That's so true. Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's a really fascinating thing that you just said, actually, too, because the movie is written so well and the story is presented so well that when you see what the end game is, it's almost like you think, well, I know you are that good of a writer. This could have just been the entire movie without the twists and turns. Right. And it would have been great either way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one other thing to mention about this movie as well is it is the composer Ryuichi Sakamoto's final score.
Oh, really?
Which
I did not know that.
I believe he died 2 months prior to the movie's release. And I don't really know, I'll be honest, I don't really know. He's kind of a blind spot for me, Sakamoto. I only really know his very famous Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, you know, do 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 do. Beautiful. But yeah, I thought it was a really lovely score, especially
the score was really lovely.
Yeah, and in like the final moment of the movie in particular there's this beautiful piano track that he does, which is, I've been meaning to actually find it so I can sort of add it to my liked songs on Spotify. But yeah, really, really beautiful. What would you pair this movie with? You know what? This was quite difficult for me. I had to really think here.
Yeah, like I said, it kind of changed every like 40 minutes, because I was like, oh, now I feel a very different way about this movie than I did before. The movie, though, I think I would pair this with it's a Korean film called Burning that came out in 2018.
Ooh, Steven Yeun?
Have you seen Burning?
Haven't.
It does have Steven Yeun.
I haven't.
In it. Oh man, you should really see Burning. I can't recommend it enough. Yeah, it does have Steven Yeun in it, as well as some other like super talented Korean actors I didn't know as well. The director is Lee Chang-dong, and it's it's one of those movies you don't want to talk about too much because you just need to go in 100% blind. But it has these similar ingredients of the first 30 minutes of this film really reminded me of the first 30 minutes of Burning, where there are people who are acting in ways that are unfathomable, and you start getting so nervous. You start just getting so like, I do not understand, but like it just keeps you at that like arm's length the whole time, where you're like, I know there's something going on here and I just can't quite crack it. And it's super engaging. I think you would enjoy it a lot. I could be wrong, but I think you would enjoy it a lot. So yeah, that's my
excellent. Well, that's going to go right to the top of my list. Thanks, Ian. Cool. Well, I'll be honest, I didn't know what movie to pair this with, so I've gone with a play. Another play, Great. Like I did for the last pairing, but this
allowed.
Play is called this play is called The North Pool, written by Rajiv Joseph, and it's a great play. It's a two-hander, and it's essentially about this Middle Eastern kid in this high school that gets called into the vice principal's office after a school day, and the rest of the play is just this conversation between the two of them. And it seems as if he's been called in there just to be given detention for a very minor incident like skipping class, but as they continue to talk to each other, it becomes very apparent that they both hold hidden agendas, they both hold secrets, and especially around the recent suicide of a teenage girl. And yeah, I mean, and it's a really wonderful play that is just takes as many twists and turns as this movie does, and it also speaks to the relationship between a teacher and student. You know, like this movie really drills into, and with the sort of overtones of suicide as well. And it's just, it's gripping. And so I'd highly recommend it.
Great. Yeah. I'll put it on my list and then hope that someone puts it on somewhere.
At the
very least I can read it. At the very least I can read the play. Exactly.
This isn't what people signed up for. They're signing up for pairings, you know, for like triple features and not reading assignments.
Now we have homework for next week.
Yeah, exactly. All right, great. Well, thanks, Ian. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it. I highly recommend this movie. It's a beautiful film. Please, everybody, go and watch it. And again, you know, if you are still listening and you haven't seen the movie, sorry.
Yeah, forget everything we told you and then go watch it yourself.
Yeah, we tried our best. All right, well, I just want to give a special thanks, as always, to Phoenix Cinema. Our music is by Stefan Krieger, and our episodes are edited by the wonderful Noah Anderson. Also, if anyone is interested in following our film club and the movies that we watch on there, you can have a look at our Instagram page. It's called The Film Geeks, so you can see what we're watching, rating, and awarding. Lovely. If you want to go watch a movie, everybody, head to the Phoenix Cinema, and I will meet you there.